Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes? Matt here with YoVideogames, and I'm back with another game review. I know it's been a while, but here we are. We got a lot of big games that came out last month, and I thought I'd give my final thoughts and impressions of them instead of trying to do a whole bunch of playthroughs and kind of have a scattershot thoughts as I'm going through the game. Rather, I'm going to try to put it all together in one simple review here. So let me know what you guys think of that. And anyways, let's move on to the first game review I'm going to do for last month, and that is Horizon 2 Forbidden West, which, of course, big sequel, big Sony first-party game. And it's also one of the showpiece games of the PS5, even though it's cross-gen, which is pretty incredible when you really think about it. But anyways, 5 years almost to the day from the first game, we get the part 2, the continuing story of the Horizon series. And how does it stack up? Well, I mean, to be very blunt and right off the bat, it is more Horizon. It's not a radical departure. It's not a sort of reinvention of the series. It is more Horizon. It's just better. And I think that's probably the big takeaway you should probably take, is that, yes, it is better. In pretty much every single aspect, I think the game is a marked improvement over the original, although some areas are more improved than others. Anyways, let's talk about the first things first, and that is the graphics, which are, of course, phenomenal. And somehow they even managed to make it still look pretty good on last gen, even though, obviously it's only going to run at 30 frames, which is what the original ran at originally anyways. An interesting thing is that on PS5, it has performance, and resolution mode. But here's the crazy thing. A lot of times it's just okay, 4K versus 1080p, 30 versus 60. That's kind of it. Not the case here. Not the case at all, actually. When you turn on, resolution or graphics mode, it actually adds things that are not in the performance mode. You are getting much better and more intricate lighting and effects and stuff when you go into graphics mode. So much to the point that some people, even Digital Foundry, were saying they preferred to play it on graphics mode. I think that's personally crazy. I played a little bit of it, but I don't know if I could handle more than 10 minutes in graphics mode, because performance mode is 60, mostly smooth 60. I'm not going to say it's a perfect 60, but it's a mostly smooth 60 on PS5 version. And I just couldn't. I could not. I mean, it definitely looked better in graphics mode, but performance mode, that 60 frames to me was just so critical to my enjoyment of the overall experience that having that there, I could not deal without it. So, but here's the good thing though. It's there. The option is there. If you want a graphics mode that actually has way better lighting as well as higher resolutions and all that, more jazz to it, you got that option. And if you want a game that still looks phenomenal, but doesn't have the more crazy stuff, crazy lighting, but it runs at 60, you got it. And I'm very, very happy for that. I have no quibbles at all as far as that stuff go. Horizon's always been sort of like a showpiece game, because it's the sort of nature versus mechanical future, robot dinosaurs in a wilderness setting, and of course it's no different here. And I really prefer that, because it's a really nice. It's not just it's here's civilization with overgrown. There is that, but it's really dense vegetation and really, really good-looking stuff. And then there's a lot of interesting ways in which they've sort of imagined a sort of tribalistic, out or springing up of a bunch of different tribes around different areas, of the American West. And I enjoy that. I kind of like seeing how they do that. It's really fun to see where they take landmarks from all over, from Utah to California, and sort of transform them, or just sort of they show both the overgrowth and the nature taking it back, and then how tribes have sort of built around it and stuff. One big example is that there's a big solar farm right outside of Las Vegas in real life, and it's really hard not to notice it if you're driving in from California. And in the game, this tribe has sort of built a town around it and on top of it, and it's actually very interesting looking, because it's a real thing. So I got a real kick out of that. There's some minor things that are not even that really landmark. They're not going to show up on any tourist guide videos, but they are real things that are in California and they show up in the game. So like for a developer that lives in Amsterdam, they really did their homework as far as like all these different locales in California and Utah and Nevada. And they did that in the first game as well for Wyoming and again, Colorado. There actually is no Colorado in this game. I forget I said that. But yeah, Colorado and Utah, Wyoming in the first game actually had a ton more locations than I knew about because I don't live there. But in this, and it's the same deal here. There's actually a ton of locations that are actually real, but like, twisted in this sort of like far-flung, nature overtaken future. Anyways, as far as the environments go, of course they're gorgeous, but I will say this, there's one little, I don't really think it's it's not really a negative, it's just sort of like something I noticed, and that is, you're going to spend a lot of the early game, like the first 9 to 10 hours or more, like easily more if you're a completionist, kind of in very, very, very similar environments from part 1. Because the game starts kind of basically leaves the foot off from a location from part 1 and then kind of like moves westward from there, you're going to see a whole lot of very similar environments for like the first good chunk of the game. And there's a little tiny bit of environment fatigue a bit, where it's like, I've kind of seen this, yes, it looks better, but like, you kind of want to get to that box art, image of like Huron standing on the beach in San Francisco, and you get there eventually. And when you do, it's great because they actually do a good job of like showcasing a very different type of environment. But you're going to spend a good chunk of this game kind of going through the same rocky, wooded / snowy, foresty areas that dominated the first title. So it was almost a little bit like, okay, when are we going to get to the new stuff? There was a little bit of that. So, of course, that kind of also depends on you, the player, how much time you want to spend in the early part. But a good chunk of the actual game progression in the first, I'd almost say, almost close to half of the game is in kind of samey environments from the first title. But that doesn't mean they don't look good. It's just they do. It's just you kind of seen it before. But man, it's worth it when you do get to the coast because they really put some real goddamn effort into how good the underwater sections are and how incredible the whole environment, ecosystem of underwater life and stuff. It looks really good. I'm not even talking about the robots. I'm talking about like the actual stuff. Like, man, this stuff looks incredible when you get to it. As far as sound goes, jumping from graphics to sound, it's actually a step up from the first game. I was actually very impressed. There's even like they do some really smart things where there's like one village that's sort of musically based or has a lot like singing is a big part of their culture, and so they actually incorporate that into the game so you hear them singing when you're near it. It's very good. I really liked it. It's a nice step up. It's not something as good as, say, Xenoblade when it comes to soundtrack. Like, you're still not really getting that beautiful, just fully embracing music as a part of the identity and character of the environment like you do in some of these, JRPGs. And this is a Western RPG. I would not consider this an action game or just a sort of generic open world game. This is really an RPG. Like, the mechanics, the gameplay system, everything about it is very RPG. So I think I really consider this, an open world action RPG. And as far as the music goes, it's definitely a nice step up, but it's not really competing yet at any of the level of some of like, the more standout JRPGs, which, to me really have embraced music as a part of the character and identity of the environment and the game world and stuff. And basically what I'm saying is, outside of a few choice areas, maybe like a few towns, you'd never listen to this soundtrack and immediately be reminded of a whole area and all the adventures you had in, say, a specific area of the game, because, man, that theme of this area is so iconic and so defined and so part of its identity that just hearing a few musical notes will bring back all the memories. You're not going to get that. You're not going to get that here. You'll get it in my YoVideogames. You're not going to get it here, but it is a nice step up, and I appreciate that a little bit. I wish it was like they embraced it even more. Like some of the stuff they did with, again, like some of the village themes and stuff, I wish they embraced that a little harder and really kind of like went hard into it. But it's still an improvement. So again, it's not really a nitpick. It's just like I wish it was a little more emphasized. as far as, you know, the story and world building, this is where the game excels. I think that's kind of like the big thing here is that Horizon tells a very fun, very engaging sci-fi narrative. I really like just sort of exploring the world, and it's not just within the cutscenes, but it's also within all the little data log files you can find. It's basically like Resident Evil files, and you find them all scattered all over the world, and it's really fun to piece together, you know, what happened in the past and how you got to this point, to this future that you're in, and it really builds off the first game. It's really nice that they included a sort of catch-up video, which is kind of done very smartly through the use of another character to sort of get you up to speed with the storyline in part 2, even if you haven't played part 1. So that's nice. I actually think that was a really good idea. And I like that they really embraced the narrative moving forward. It's not sort of like, it's really not a repeat of part 1. Like, story-wise, this is very much continuing a narrative. It is not sort of like retreading the same ground narratively speaking or character-wise speaking. Like, Aloy is very much the person that she was at the end of part 1 going into part 2 and all throughout and going forward from there. It is not a reset in any sort of way. I appreciate that. I like that. I think it's the strongest part of the game. It is a little talky though. Some people have sort of like noticed that if you're really into like visual novel or world building, this won't really bother you at all. And I think another thing to really emphasize is that the character animation, the dialogue, and especially the mocap work and cinematography, really the cinematography of just sort of even minute cutscenes, big improvement. You know, it's much more dynamic. It's much less static and sort of, you know, shot reverse shot that like old BioWare games are. You know, put me to sleep. But this is much more engaging and much better, you know, cinematography, much better mocap. I think the fact that it's so good really kind of like it made me forget about the fact that, not entirely, but often, that this is a very talky game. There's a lot of long dialogue scenes that go on for a very long time. And I didn't notice too much because I was actually really wrapped up in the game. The voice acting's phenomenal. Motion capture's phenomenal. The story is interesting. I'm really into it. I'm interested in learning about what's going on in this world. I like that, all of that. So that being said, if somehow, like, if you're not really gravitating towards the world or the characters, yeah, I can see where that could be like, oh man, I just don't care. So, I mean, you can always just skip through it, you know, to your own risk of not knowing necessarily where to go. But I do think that it's done so well that I didn't notice most of the time that it is so, and it is talky, but I like it. So that being said, if you're here for the characters in the world, I think that's another step up from the first game, and especially with the way they've done it cinematically and sort of mocap-wise and lip-sync-wise and stuff. So big improvement there as well, so if you're really into it. So again, everything is better than the first game, and that includes even the sort of day-to-day combat. There's a lot more things you could do. They greatly expanded the skill tree. So the first game had about 3, and then there was like a 4th added in DLC, and this game has like 6 or 8, I think, right off the bat. And there's a lot to unlock, and it's not that terribly hard to unlock because, you know, as you level up, you get like skill points, and then you know, put the skill points where you want to put the skill points, and it all works really well. I don't really have anything bad to say about that at all. They've done some really smart things as far as item management goes, and sort of, you know, not tapping out so quickly, and like having a stash where it's like, okay, well, if once you've maxed your pouch out, like in game, like anything you collect will go to like a stash, you know, that you can collect from like a, you know, a home base chest. There's some really smart things there. There are these things in the world called shelters, which are a little too few and far between for my liking, because shelters are the only place in the game where you can actually pass the time. You can go sit down and like, you can't do it at every campfire, but like at quote-unquote shelter locations, you can sit in front of a campfire and choose what time of day you want to switch to. Not nearly enough of them. This is sort of like a personal gripe. I wish there was an easier way to advance the time. But I think as far as item management goes, they've done some really good quality of life things, and then even the patches afterwards have sort of like upgraded that as well. There's a lot of really cool what do you call them? Not quality of life, but ability, like, you know, disability options, you know, for color blindness or whatever. Some really good options there. accessibility options, I should say, is probably the word I'm looking for. There's a lot of good accessibility options, stuff like that. I really like that. And that kind of gets all the way down to, okay, so is there anything that's not really, well, again, everything's better, but I got to get to my main gripe about the game, because I've kind of been holding it back for a little bit now. And that is that the combat in this game still isn't that good. And what I mean combat, I mostly mean melee combat. Like the bow and arrow stuff is fine. Most anything that's just launching a projectile is still fine. It's you know, it does its job very well. You know, there's a lot of, you know, simple, like, you know, there's a lot of gameplay loop stuff that you're supposed to do, like slow-mo zoom-ins and stuff like that. And there's definitely when you finally do get the, you know, the air glider, that's great. It really helps out a lot. The hook shot's great. So traversal is much better. There's a lot more surfaces to climb. But man, I gotta say, like, the melee combat is better than the first game, but it is nowhere near as good as I was hoping it was going to be. Now, they added a lot to it. It's not to say like they didn't try. They really did. You know, they even have a whole skill tree dedicated for melee combat. And, you know, you can unlock, you know, stuff. You can unlock combos, different combo routes, and you know, you can unlock, you know, upgrades to make things speedier and better. But the general fundamentals of melee combat for both the player and the enemy characters still doesn't quite gel. Like, you can really see, you know, the skeletal bones of Eurojank just kind of in there. And what I mean by that is things have a lot of delay. Like, you know, pressing a button to the action being performed on screen is like, you know, criminally long, especially if you're a fighting game player. And then on top of that, I don't know what the deal is. I don't know why this happens so much in Western RPGs, but every single move, even a light attack, needs to have some sort of like long windup, and it's just mind-boggling that it's still going on. And Aloy and the enemies will do these wild trackings where you'll see an enemy jumping at you from like 30 feet away, and they'll jump in the air, and then they'll sort of follow you and track you. Like, the whole body of this dinosaur will pivot like 45 degrees in the air towards you. And you'll do the same thing where like you'll wind up like a big charge, and then Aloy will just sort of like hover over the ground, and then like as she does her big arcing swing, and like she'll like pivot like 90 degrees sometimes and just like track towards an enemy and just sort of smack it. It's not great. It doesn't feel good. Like, if you're used to something like Nier Automata, this game will feel like you are not only underwater, but you are also stuck. Like, you are buried in sand and underwater, you know, comparatively speaking, to the sort of quickness and rapid feel of combat in Nier Automata. It is, yeah, it is a long far cry from that game, which is kind of like close to like a gold standard as far as like action RPGs go, as far as melee combat is. And then here it is a slow, clunky mess where like characters have huge wind up, and then like they go really fast, and then they'll like hard pivot and just sort of like fly and float over towards what they're going towards, and it doesn't work. And then you get to moments where like you'll fight enemies that are massive, and it gets really, if the enemy gets too close up on you, or you get too close up on the enemy, you can't even see what the hell's going on. Combat it's kind of a mess with all the work that they did put into melee combat. It's really, it's not where it needs to be. It's still better than the first game. It's because there's a whole skill tree dedicated towards it again. Like they really did try. They put some effort into it, but it feels more like they just added on to the existing clunky combat of the first game, rather than take a good hard look, disassemble it, and then like reassemble and make sure it felt you know, fantastic to play from the beginning. So, and I think that's what hurts the game the most, is that you eventually, I would say after about the second half, there's a very clear point of the game that very much feels like this is the middle point of the game. Now you're going to continue your adventures on the second half of the game. You'll know when you see it. And when you get to that second half of the game and the enemies start getting just generally massive and big and like, you know, very threatening, like from the get-go, that's where it kind of like starts to feel a little bit like a chore to deal with enemy robots, rather than like, oh, I'll take out this on the way, I'll get some supplies, I'll loot some, you know, some scraps off of this enemy as I'm going by, and then it becomes like, oh god, I have to deal with 3 Ravagers kind of thing. So Again, I actually got to a point where I just eventually gave up and just dropped it down to easy, and my enjoyment of the game actually went up actually fairly high because it just took too damn long to kill things. I don't have any problem with difficulty, but like the sponginess of anime. I mean, granted, you are shooting bows and arrows and you know, whacking with metal sticks against whole giant dinosaur robots. But at the end of the day, like, you know, so that is realistic, but it also wasn't very fun with how much HP and health these creatures tend to have. They're very well animated. The animation's amazing. I can't knock that. Like, but again, like combat animation almost takes precedence. It does take precedence over actual, you know, the mechanics and fundamentals of actually fighting things in the game world. And that is still kind of a problem. I think that's the one thing really holding this game series back. Whereas something like Ghost of Tsushima feels pretty fantastic. It doesn't feel like Ghost of Tsushima doesn't feel like as responsive as, say, a Platinum Games game, like, you know, a top of the line Platinum game. Doesn't feel quite as, but it feels really close to it, and it feels like you really enjoy getting into combat situations. And again, because they're both sort of open world, they have enemy tribe camps in say Horizon 2 and in Ghost of Tsushima, where the difference is in Ghost of Tsushima, you really don't mind sneaking around and killing or getting into outright all-out combat with everyone in the thing. And then in Horizon, it's almost kind of like, you know, you're really kind of almost emphasized to do stealth, because fighting things head-on in Horizon just isn't as fun as it should be. And that's really disappointing because it's such a beautiful game. Things look crazy. The animation is fantastic. And really everything else is just really good about the game. But the combat just kind of feels not as impactful and definitely nowhere near as responsive as it needs to. It's the one thing where I'm like, if this continues where like again, it is an improvement, but it's nowhere near the step up that the rest of the parts of the games are. And this is really going to start dragging the series down, you know, if we get into Horizon 3 and 4 and stuff, and it really needs to step its game up as far as melee combat goes. It really needs to shed that sort of Eurojank skeleton it's got. Now it's just a skeleton in the closet, I feel, for this game, and it didn't drag the whole experience down altogether at all, though. I mean, I still beat the game. I still enjoyed the game. I still really liked where it was going. Characters are great. I really don't want to get into spoilers, so you'll have to forgive me on that. You know, it feels like, okay, you're complaining a whole lot about, you know, the combat and all this stuff, but it's like all the good things about the game, besides the graphics, I'm like, don't want to spoil. I could, but I feel like that's cheating you out of the best experience of the game, and that is experiencing a very cool, a very fun, a very well done, well acted, well performed sci-fi adventure. And I don't want to take that away from anyone who actually wants to play this game. So with that in mind, I would give Horizon 2 Forbidden West a sort of critical and sort of both critical and subjective, whatever, personal score of 8. It's an 8 out of 10 for me. I really like certain things. I really like there are certain unlocks in the game that are fantastic. This experience gets better for the most part. The experience just gets better as you get into it, except for really the combat, which never really takes off, and then eventually becomes like the enemies get too tanky. You know, that I just personally just said, okay, after the halfway point, I was like, I'm dropping it to easy because I can't take this anymore. But all these other experiences generally just get better and better, and the game builds and builds and has, you know, a lot going for it, both, you know, story-wise, character-wise, graphics-wise. Even sounds a nice, you know, nice little bump in sound quality too. So, again, it's mostly a positive experience, but you know, the general combat of the game could use some work. And the last boss is kind of super disappointing. It's super disappointing to fight. Like, well, I don't want to get too spoiler because I'm not talking about the last boss here, but like, it almost doesn't matter. And almost everything you unlock and do doesn't matter. You just shoot it in the chest, and that's it. That's all you do. There's nothing else. Nothing else actually works on it. So it becomes a very, like, it's weird that you get to a final boss where the pivotal thing is not about using any of the stuff you've unlocked. Just shoot it straight in the chest with your most powerful arrows. Good night. So, anyways, yeah, this game was an 8 out of 10 for me. I enjoyed it. I actually do recommend it, but I will say that, like, if you're looking for something where you really are engaged in the especially the melee combat. If you're in the, like, you know, really love getting into the thick of it with that, nah, might be a little disappointed on that front. If you played the first game, it's very similar to that. It's just better. Just like the first one, but a little bit better. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you on the channel later, dudes.